Hi, fifth grade. So today we're going to start reading chapters 9 and finish with chapter 10 of The Thief of Always. So chapter 9 is called, What Do You Dream? Harvey didn't mention what had happened at the lake to anyone, not even Lulu. In part because he felt stupid for falling in, and in part because the house tried so hard to please him in the days that followed that he almost forgot about the accident entirely. That very night, in fact, he found a piece of colored string with his name tag on it at the base of the Christmas tree and followed it through the house to find a new bike, even more splendid than the one he'd lost 2 years before waiting for him. But that was just the first of many fine surprises the holiday house sprang in quick succession. One morning, for instance, Wendell and Harvey climbed up into the treehouse to discover the branches around it were swarming with parrots and monkeys. Another day, in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, Mrs. Griffin called them through into the living room where the flames of the fire had taken on the shapes of dragons and heroes and were doing a fiery battle in the grate. And in the heat of one lazy afternoon, Harvey was wakened from a doze by a chorus of shouts and found a troop of mechanical acrobats performing clockwork, defying feats on the lawn. The greatest surprise, however, began with the appearance of one of Rictus's siblings. "My name is Jive," he said, stepping out of the early evening murk at the top of the stairs. Every muscle in his body seemed to be in motion, ticks, jigs, and jitterings that had wasted him away until he barely cast a shadow. Even his hair, which was a mass of oiled curls, seemed to hear some crazed rhythm. It writhed on his scalp in a knotted frenzy. "Brother Rictus sent me along to see how you're doing," he said, his tone succulent. "I'm doing fine," Harvey replied. "Did you say Brother Rictus?" "We're from the same brood, loosely speaking," Jive said. "I hope you call your folks now and then." "Yep," said Harvey. "I called them yesterday." "Are they missing you?" "Didn't sound like it." "Are you missing them?" Harvey shrugged. "Not really," he said. This wasn't strictly true. He had his homesick days, but he knew that if he went back home, he'd be in the school the day after and wishing he'd stayed in the holiday house for a while longer. "You're going to make the most of being here then?" said Jive, practicing a weird little dance step up and down the stairs. "Yeah," said Harvey. "I just want to have fun." "Who doesn't?" Jive grinned. "Who doesn't?" He sidled up to Harvey and whispered, "Speaking of fun." "What?" said Harvey. "You never did get that window back for that trick of his." "No, I didn't," said Harvey. "Why the heck not?" "I could never think of a way." "Oh, I'm sure we could cook up something between the two of us," Jive replied mischievously. "It has to be something he'll never think of," Harvey said. "That shouldn't be difficult," said Jive. "Tell me, what's your favorite monster?" Harvey didn't have to think hard about that. "A vampire," he said with a grin. "I found this great mask." "Masks are a good beginning," Jive said, "but vampires need to swoop out of the mist." He spread his arms, curling his long fingers like the claws of some eye-gouging beast. "Swoop down and snatch up their prey, then rise up again, up against the moon. I can see it now." "So can I," said Harvey. "So can I," said Harvey, "but I'm not a bat." So how do I swoop?" "Ah," said Jive, "we'll have Mar work on that for us. After all, what's a Halloween without a transformation or two?" He consulted the grandfather clock on the landing. "We've still got time to do it tonight. You go down and tell Wendell you'll meet him outside. I'll go up to the roof and find Mar. You meet us up there." "I've never been up on the roof." "There's a door on the top landing. I'll see you up there in a few minutes." "I'll have to get my mask and coat and stuff." "You won't need a mask tonight," Jive said. "Trust me. Now hurry up. Time's a-wasting." It took Harvey only a minute or two to tell Wendell to go on ahead. He was sure Wendell suspected something and was probably preparing for some counteract, but Harvey knew he and Jive had something up their sleeves when Wendell, expert on shock tactics though he was, couldn't anticipate. With the first part of the plan laid, he hurried upstairs again, found the door Jive had mentioned, and climbed up onto the roof. Heights had never bothered him. He liked to be up above the world, looking down on it. "Over here," Jive called to him, and Harvey took off along the narrow walkways and up the steep roofs to where his fellow conspirator stood. "Sure-footed," Jive observed. "No problem." "How about flying?" said a third voice as its owner steeped from the shadows of a chimney. "This is Mars," said Jive, "another of our little family." Unlike Jive, who looked nimble enough to walk on the eaves of the whim took him, Mars seemed to have slug blood in her somewhere. Harvey almost expected to see her fingers leave silver trails on the brick she touched, or see soft horns appear from her balding head. She was grossly fat, her flesh barely clinging to her bones. Wherever it could, around her mouth and eyes, at her neck and wrists, it collapsed in clammy folds. She reached out and poked Harvey. "I said, how about flying?" "What about it?" Harvey said, pushing her hand away. "Done much?" "I flew to Florida once." "She doesn't mean in a plane," Jive told him. "Oh, in dreams, maybe?" said Mar. "Oh yeah, I dream about flying." "That's good," Mar replied, grinning with satisfaction. She had not a single tooth in her mouth. Harvey stared at the empty maw in disgust. "You're wondering where they've gone, aren't you?" "You're wondering where they've gone, aren't you?" she said to Harvey. "Go on, admit it." Harvey shrugged. "Well, yes, I am. Karna took them, the thieving brute. I had fine teeth, beautiful teeth." "Who's Karna?" Harvey wanted to know. "Never mind," Jive said, hushing Mar before she could reply. "Get to it or he'll miss the moment." Mar muttered something beneath her breath, then said, "Come to me, boy," extending her arms in Harvey's direction. Her touch was icy. "Feels weird, huh?" said Jive as Mar's fingers floated over his face, brushing it here and there. "Don't worry, she knows what she's doing." "And what's that? Changing you? Into what?" "You tell her," Jive said. "It won't last long, so enjoy it. Go on, tell her about being a vampire." "That's what I want Wendell to see," Harvey said. "A vampire," Mar said softly, her fingers pressing harder against his skin. "Yeah, I want to have fangs like a wolf and a red throat and white skin like I've been dead for 1,000 years. 2,000, said Jive. 10,000, said Harvey, beginning to enjoy the game. And crazy eyes that can see in the dark and pointy ears like a bat's ears. Wait up, Mar said. I've got to get all this right. Her fingers were working hard upon him now, as though his flesh was clay and she was molding it. His face was tingling and he wanted to reach up and touch it, but he was afraid of spoiling her handiwork. And there's got to be fur, Jive observed, sleek black fur on his neck. Mar's hands dabbled at his throat, and he felt fur sprouting where she touched him. And the wings, Harvey said. Don't forget about the wings. Never, said Jive. Spread your arms, boy, Mar told him. He did so, and she ran her hands along them, smiling now. It's good, she said. It's good. He looked down at himself. To his astonishment, he found his fingers were gnarled and sharp, leathery flaps were hanging from his arms. The wind gusted against them, threatening to carry him off the roof. then and there. You know you're playing a dangerous game, don't you? Mar said as she stood back to admire her handiwork. You'll either break your head or scare the life out of your friend Wendell, or both. He won't fall, woman, Jive said. He's got the knack of this. I can tell just by looking at him. He peered at Harvey with his empty squints. Wouldn't be surprised if you weren't a vampire in another life, boy, he said. Vampires don't have other lives, Harvey said. The words were more difficult to say with a mouth full of fangs. They live forever. That's right, said Jive, snapping his fingers. So they do. So they do. Well, I'm finished, said Mar. You can get going, boy. The wind came gusting again, and if Jive hadn't been holding on to him as they walked the edge of the roof, Harvey would surely have been carried away. That's your friend, Jive whispered, pointing down into the shadows. Much to his amazement, Harvey found that he could see Wendell quite clearly, even though it was pitch dark in the thicket. He could hear him, too, every little breath, every beat of his heart. What do I do? Harvey said. Do I flap or what? Jump, Jive said. The wind will take care of the rest, either the wind or gravity. And with that, he shoved Harvey off the ledge of the roof and into the empty air. Chapter 10, Falling from Grace. The wind wasn't there to bear him up. He plummeted like a slate tossed from the gables, a cry of sheer terror escaping his throat. He saw Wendell turn, saw a look of mortal fear come onto his face. Then the wind came out of nowhere, cold and strong, and just as his legs brushed the bushes, he felt himself lifting up and up toward the sky. His cry became a whoop, his terror joy. The moon was larger than he'd ever seen it, and its vast white face filled his sight, like the face of his mother bending to kiss him goodnight. Except that he needed no sleep tonight, no, nor a mother to wish him sweet dreams. This was better than any dream, flying with the wind in his wings and the world shuddering below in fear of his shadow. He looked for Wendell again and saw him fleeing for the safety of the house. No, you don't, he thought, and turning his wings like leathery sails, he swooped down on his prey. A blood-curdling shriek filled his ears, and for a moment he thought it was the wind. Then he realized it was his own throat that was uttering this inhuman din, and the shriek became laughter, wild, lunatic laughter. Don't, please, don't, Wendell was sobbing as he ran. Somebody help me, somebody help me. Harvey knew he'd already had his revenge. Wendell was frightened out of his wits, but it was too much fun to stop now. He liked the feel of the wind beneath him and the cold moon on his back. He liked the sharpness of his eyes and the strength of his claws, but most of all, he liked the fear he was causing. Liked the look on Wendell's upturned face and the sound of panic in his chest. The wind was carrying him down into the thicket, and as he landed, Wendell dropped to his knees, begging for mercy. Don't kill me, please, please, I beg you, don't kill me. Harvey had seen and heard enough. He'd had his revenge. It was time to put an end to the game before the fun soured. He opened his mouth to announce himself, but Wendell, seeing the red throat and the wolfish fangs and thinking this meant certain death, began a new round of supplications. This time, however, he wasn't simply begging. I'm too fat to eat, he said, but there's another kid around here somewhere. Harvey growled at this. There is, Wendell said, I swear, and there's more meat on him than on me. Listen to the child, said a voice in the bushes at Harvey's side. He glanced around. There was Jive, his wiry, warm form barely visible among the barbs. He'd see you dead, young Harvey. Wendell heard none of this. He was still advertising the edibility of his friend. Hoisting up his shirt and shaking his blubbery belly to prove how palatable he was. You don't want me, he sobbed. Take Harvey, take Harvey. Bite him, said Jive. Go on, drink a little of his blood. Why not? The fat's no good, but the blood's hot. The blood's tasty. He was doing a little dance as he spoke, stamping his feet to the rhythm of his chant. Don't waste the taste. Go eat the meat. And still Wendell whined, all snot and tears. You don't want me. Find Harvey. Find Harvey. And the more he sobbed, the more Jive's chant made sense to Harvey. Who was this ridiculous boy anyway? Wendell. He was too eager to serve Harvey up his dinner to be called a friend. He was just a tasty morsel. Any vampire worth his wings would chew off his head as soon as he looked at him. And yet, what are you waiting for? Jive wanted to know. We've gone through all this trouble to make a monster of you. Yes, but it's a game, Harvey said. A game, said Jive. No, no, boy. It's more than that. It's an education. Harvey didn't know what he wanted or meant by this, and he wasn't altogether certain he wanted to know. If you don't pounce soon, Jive hissed, you're going to lose him. It was true, Wendell's tears were clearing, and he was starting to look at his attacker with a puzzled look. Are you going to let me go? He murmured. Harvey felt Jive's hand on his back. Do it, Jive said. Harvey looked at Wendell's tear-stained face and trembling hands. If the situation had been reversed, he thought to himself, would I have been much braver? The answer he knew was no. It's now or never, said Jive. Then it's never, Harvey said. Never. The word came out as a guttural roar, and Wendell fled before it, yelling at the top of his voice. Harvey didn't give chase. You disappoint me, boy, Jive said. I thought you had the killer instinct. Well, I don't, said Harvey, a little ashamed of himself. He felt like a coward, even though he knew he'd done the right thing. That was a waste of magic, said another voice, and Ma appeared from out of the bushes, her arms filled with enormous fungi. Where'd you find those? Jive said. Usual place, Ma replied. She gave Harvey a contemptuous look. I suppose you want your old body back, she said. Yes, please. We should leave him like this, said Jive. He'd get around to sucking blood sooner or later. Nah, said Mar. There's only so much magic to go around. You know that. Why waste it on a miserable punk like this? She waved her hand casually in Harvey's direction, and he felt the power that had filled his limbs and transformed his face drain out of him. A relief, of course, to feel the magic unmade. But a little part of him mourned the loss. In a matter of moments, he was once again an earthbound boy, wingless and weak. With the spell removed, Mar turned her back on him and waddled off into the darkness. Jive, however, lingered long enough to have one last dig at Harvey. You missed your chance there, kiddo, he said. You could have been one of the greats. It was a trick, that's all, Harvey said, concealing the strange unhappiness he felt. A Halloween trick. It meant nothing. There are those who disagree, Jive said darkly. Those who'd say that all the great powers in the world are bloodsuckers and soul stealers at heart. And we must serve them. All of us, serve them to our dying day. He stared hard at Harvey all the way through this peculiar little speech, and then with a nimble step retreated into the shadows and was gone. Harvey found Wendell in the kitchen, a hot dog in one hand and a cookie in the other, telling Miss Griffin about what he'd seen. He dropped his food when Harvey came in and yelped with relief. You're alive! You're alive! Of course I'm alive, said Harvey. Why shouldn't I be? There's something out there, a terrible beast. It almost ate me. I thought maybe it had eaten you. Harvey looked down at his hands and legs. Nope, he said. Not a nibble. I'm glad, Wendell said. I'm so, so glad. You're my best friend for always. I was vampire food 5 minutes ago, Harvey thought, but he said nothing. Maybe there'd come a time when he could tell Wendell about his transformation and temptation, but this wasn't it. He simply said, I'm hungry, and sat down at the table beside his fair weather friend to put something sweeter than blood in his belly.